So from understanding the human history, the human collective in the eighth house, the depths of the ocean and the far reaches of space, the ninth house, governed by, it's the Sagittarian house, the higher mind, is it the preachers, the teachers, the know-it-alls, more of a negative connotation, I guess, but what is your spin on that one?
So by the time we're now, if we think about, as I said before, the circle of the houses is divided between the 1 and the 7. So you can draw a line. Talk about the southern hemisphere, and now we're in the northern hemisphere. And now, because we're in the northern hemisphere, or the upper hemisphere, depending on the way you're looking at the chart, you can always draw back. Part of the answer, as I referenced before, is to go to the opposite side and say, what is it the root of 9, or what is the opposite of 9? It's 3. So the first way of understanding the ninth house is to think about the third house. If the ninth house is higher learning, then the learning of which that is represented in that ninth house tends to be the pinnacle of academia. It tends to be the pinnacle of science. It tends to be the pinnacle of knowledge, which is, of course, rooted in the third house of learning, right? So those who are very effectively expressing the ninth house energies of the higher mind are probably tenured professors, highly regarded subject matter experts in any of their fields. But when they look at and traced their ascension to that place, then they probably had a really effective functional third house. So they learned how to learn. And in addition to that, they learned how to play. The best experts, the ones that we can listen to talking about all sorts of things on podcasts, or, the most dramatic documentaries you'll watch on television where clearly it's, next level knowledge, that's your Sagittarius energy and your Sagittarius house. So it is the arc of the third, arcs all the way through and culminates in the ninth. And, I also take it a little further from academia and intellectual pursuits is to also the house of philosophy. And, in my understanding, we have to have systems, I believe, to see the world the most effectively. We need to have a system, and one of the systems that I use to see the world is the system of philosophy, or what they call the 5 branches of philosophy, and that is very much linked to that ninth house. And those 5 branches of philosophy are epistemology. Where did we come from? What are our roots? These are intellectual and spiritual and emotional pursuits. It is very important for the human collective to understand where it came from, and for us individually to understand where we came from. So epistemology is at the heart of one of the pieces of the ninth house. Where did we come from? Another part of it is metaphysics. What is our place in this vast system that we call the universe, the multiverse, the omniverse, whatever expression you use, these ecosystems? What is our place in that? And that is a part of that Sagittarian ninth house experience. So there are experts in understanding where we fit in. Are there aliens? Stephen Hawking was a great one who talked about the mathematical possibilities of humans being the only conscious species in the universe, in the Milky Way, and the omniverse is mathematically impossible. So there are other intelligent species. That's a classic example of a ninth house expression of the higher mind within the context of metaphysics. People who go deep into epistemology are those looking, the anthropologists, those are the geneticists, those are the historians, those are the anthropologists, those are the sociologists, those are the behavioral economists, those are the ones that really want to understand what's the root of that, what is the root cause of whatever it is. And when we think about the quantum, cause and effect is a part of that as well. We might not always know the cause, but if you can get to the cause of something, it's much easier to understand the effect. These are the sorts of mental conundrums that a really effective ninth house person will be dealing with, and they'll be dealing with it very effectively. They become subject matter experts that the rest of us will rely on often for guidance. So that's why that house is often related to teaching and preaching, as you say. That's pulpits and priests and politicians often can inhabit that ninth house energy. So we've got epistemology roots, we've got metaphysics, where do we fit in? We've got ethics as a big part of the third branch of philosophy. Again, the ninth house expression is ethics. What is that? Conduct and consequences, how we behave, what are the consequences of that? That is a very important ninth house expression. We then have governance systems. There are so many different systems on the planet: communism, socialism, idealism, hedonism, democratic systems, republican systems or republic systems, whatever. Like all of that again is in that ninth house, right? These are the ninth house issues. And finally, we've got justice. Is that if we misbehave and we have a governance structure, well, how does justice work out? Well, justice and defence and are kind of mixed and mingled, but the sense of how as a group, as a tribe, as a species, we protect ourselves and externally from external threats, and also how we deal with internal threats. That is also part of the branches of philosophy. So that ninth house is a fascinating house, but it's very intellectual, it's very left-brained, and there's not a lot of emotion in that. It's very much about, this is what we've discovered, and this is how it gets presented in terms of knowledge or communication. Of course, remember that the third and the ninth are very much working together. Ophiuchus there will be an orator, a highly refined expert, somebody who's deeply versed in history, whether it be epistemology, has an amazing insight into metaphysics, particularly. We've got this atlas at the moment in the skies. We have comets that come around once every 200,000 years. We've got all sorts of things happen in space. We've got these incredible technologies that are going to the far and outer reaches. Even 13 sign astrology is a result of, science saying, hang on, the sun does go through the constellation of Ophiuchus, so therefore the system is a 13 sign system. So that's an that's a Sagittarius ninth house expression. And again, Ophiuchus enhances, amplifies, and makes bigger all of that knowledge.
I love that you touched on Atlas. It's an exciting time to, I guess, more and more things being brought to the surface as well for people to become aware of. And then it is how stuck are we in the third house? How close-minded are we? Or were we taught from a very young age to be open to other ways of doing things?
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. Ophiuchian energy in the 10th house. The 10th house is the house of Capricorn. Its guardian is Saturn. So how does this so-called father time, Lord of Karma, interact with this Ophiuchian vibe?
Yeah, I love the 10th house because it is a gateway house, and it's almost the 3/4, not quite, because it doesn't, 9 is 3/4, but the 10th house is where we make or break the soul's experience. When we go and we start in our solar from the ascendant and we've gone all the way through to the 10th house, the 10th being opposite the 4th, if the 4th represents our lineage and roots and who we are at home, then the 10th represents who we are in the world. And, it's often described as the top of the chart. They call it the MC. So we've got the ascendant and the descendant, and then you've got this you've got this 1-7. The chart can be divided into these 4 quarters, and you can literally split it with a cross. And you've got the ascendant D7 1-7, and then you've got this 10-4 axis, right? So you have these 4 perfect quarters. So the 10th and the 4th axis is very important to understand in terms of the soul's journey. It is what I call the household public profile. And when you think about it, as you mentioned, being governed or ruled by Saturn, that means that it's a house of mastery, and it's a house of karma insofar as if you have mastered the human experience, relationships, work, creativity, communication, emotional intelligence, personality, resource management, dissolution of relationships and partnerships that disintegrate in the 8th, and the ability to develop philosophical view of the world, which is the 9th. If you've got all of that lined up, you're in a pretty good state by the time you get to the 10th house, because this is where the people who excel in public profile in the 10th house, who are grounded, the ones that we relate to the most, whether it's a favourite podcaster, whether it's a favourite actor, whether it's a favourite musician or singer or artist or designer or whatever it happens to be, that's probably somebody who's mastered all of what's come before. And when we think of Saturn, we're thinking of mastery. We're thinking of tough lessons. We're thinking of long cycles. You know, the Saturn cycle is 28 years, but for argument's sake is basically 3 decades, right? So it's 3 periods of 10 is that Saturn time cycle. And it's so important to understand the 10th house from a public profile perspective, because this is where we make or break. And there's expressions that are linked to the 10th house, things like, that person's gone from the outhouse to the penthouse, or alternatively, wow, how did they have that such a big fall from grace? You know, somebody's in the public profile, that are very visible, and this doesn't need to be on the public stage in terms of, you know, famous. It could just be you have a very high profile in your own home, right? You've earned the right to be the head of the household, or to be the expert in XYZ, in mothering or coaching or healing or whatever it is. You've mastered something, and you are able to stand in that mastery. That is that 10th house energy. So Ophiuchus here is very much about reminding us that if we haven't mastered something, how do we go back and start again, redo, get a do-over, providing us with insights as to the journey to the top of the hill. I mean, we think about the 10th house energy, often we relate it to the spirit animal of the goat, and we talk very much about how the goat can ascend to a very high place on a rugged mountain. 10th house is king of the hill, you've made it, you've won. But it's also the end of the human experience, because it is the last of the physical. It's the last of the physical houses. We started with resources in Taurus, we learned work in the 6th house, and now we've got to the 10th house. So some will often describe the 10th as the house of career, whereas the 6th house is the work that you do, but the 10th house is how your career ended up. Again, that's about mastery and a journey of the soul. And what's another way that we describe the relationship between those 3 physical houses of 2, 6, and 10, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, is if you thought about, I have a rough diamond in the 2nd house of Taurus, that's the resource. I polish it and perfect it and make this amazing gemstone in the 6th house of work, and that may be a labour of love, but in the 10th house is when you put it on display. And so we put on display in the 10th house all that we are, all the resources, all the knowledge, all the everything that we have learned is put on display, be that as it may. And the more that conscious we are of what comes before that, the more enjoyable the 10th house experience will be, and the less likely that we will fall from grace. We will actually be prepared at that point for the 11th and 12th house experiences, which are, if I becomes we in 1 to 7, then we becomes, you dissolve even we in that 10th house, because suddenly you're dealing with not only with your one-to-one relationships, you're now dealing with the community and the collective, which is that 11th house. So the Ophiuchus energy reminds us that mastery doesn't happen, the journey of 1,000 miles doesn't begin with a single step. Does begin with a single step, that Rome wasn't built in a day. All of those types of expressions, that anything good takes time. The hare and the tortoise. The 10th house energy is the tortoise, not the hare. So Ophiuchus energy is the wrap around to all of the lessons and the depth of knowledge that comes with achievement and accomplishment, and understanding that isn't just, we didn't get there on our own. That's the other thing, right? I was saying it to your daughter the other day, and she didn't really understand what I was getting at, but I was like, no man or no woman is an island. So we don't get to the 10th house and experience it on our own. There's always people that have helped us along the way. So Ophiuchus, remember, is just enhancing and helping us to be more effective at. So if we have imposter syndrome, which is often what people experience when they've won, they've accomplished, they've got all this material wealth, and they feel like this is empty. I've got imposter syndrome. Well, Ophiuchus 10th house is going to be the energy that helps you go deeper and look beyond the physical reality into the other layers and substrates of reality, which is the quantum field, the emotional, the mental, and a whole bunch of other stuff as well.
Yeah, thank you. And then, of course, then goes into the 11th house of community, connections with that there is more than just us, our little life that we might be living. And you spoke about the 11th house before with the 5th house. So it's important to remember how to play and be creative so that you can really flourish in this house of Aquarius. Yeah, well, if the house of Aquarius, and most people will be familiar with the term the age of Aquarius and the age of Pisces. If the age of Pisces is the patriarchal, male-dominated, top-down pyramid structures that we're all subject to, no matter where we are on the planet, there is some pyramid structure that is imposing itself on us. And that goes back to the idea of kings and queens and royalties and bloodlines and apex species and so on and so forth. All of that paradigm is coming apart at the seams because we've got a crowd sourced, ground up sense of empowerment coming into. There's a zeitgeist that's breaking out in this 11th house energy of we are collective and we all own the resources and we are all responsible for our destiny and the progression of our species. It isn't up to one or two people who've installed themselves often at the top of a hierarchy to dictate and determine to us the way that we deal with those branches of philosophy, for example, how we explore genealogy, epistemology, genetics, history, how we explore outer space, how we explore the ecosystems, the environmental systems, how, all of that stuff is being, a lot of it is being controlled at choke points. And that's that age of Pisces. Well, I'm kind of at pains to explain that because we don't understand the age of Aquarius, so therefore the 11th house, until we understand the system that we're up against. So the age of Aquarius first came into consciousness in the 60s. And we did a podcast. It was one of the most interesting ones I thought that we did in all of the ones so far, when I did a bit of a historical look at what happened in the 60s. And the energy of that time was something that we're only now seeing again in the 21st century. It's almost like that freedom-seeking, light, highly evolved,
pushing the boundaries energy of Aquarius was so obvious in the 60s. It was obvious in so many ways. It wasn't just happening in the social structures. You know, the rights of females and the blacks and the indigenous, and we had Martin Luther King, we had some great politicians, and we had apparently the lunar landing, so we had technologies, we had fashion, you know, things like jeans, this, you know, believe it or not, that smiley eye, the classic smiley, yellow smiley icon, the emoji, that was actually created in the 60s. You know, so we had all sorts of frontiers were being pushed, or boundaries were being pushed. This Aquarian energy is pushing outwards. So, like you touched on before, yes, in order to push outwards, though, you have to have a very functional fifth house, because the greatest creators who magnify that into systems thinking were probably very good at playing games like Lego, like Jenga, like strategy games. The greatest artists, the greatest architects. If you think about, you know, how does somebody sit and look at in these days, the architect, they look at a space and they can visualize a house and then put that into a computer program, and it's just a blueprint, but then they're able to show that to some builders who can come and make that a reality. That's the Aquarian energy right there, is the ability to see something which isn't there. You see, a great designer sees possibility and potential where we might see a desert and desolation. A great artist sees everything that we don't see. So the Aquarian house, of course, holds the dreamers, and it holds the visionaries, and it holds the systems thinkers. And for me, the one of the vectors of great change, whether we like it or not, is technology. Technology is what is going to advance humans forward, whether it's quantum computing, whether it's AI, whether it's genetics, you know, the nanotechnologies that are being created. There are all kinds of incredible ideas coming out of the minds of human beings that are learning how to play fifth house and juxtaposing that into their work, sixth house, and they're becoming experts, 10th house, and they're now sharing that with the world. Now, of course, every house has its dark side. So there's lots of dark side. There's lots of nefarious stuff going on in the age of Aquarius and in that 11th house. But if we focus on the positive, this is where we're going to face the new frontiers, and we're going to learn how to challenge everything that we've come to understand about what it is to be a human. The ideas of things like beam me up, Scotty, and space travel, you know, of nanobots going into our body and fixing a gene that is likely to develop into cancer. There's even the most bizarre, which is going to cut, and this is why I talked about the branches of philosophy with ethics, because one of the things we were talking about the other day with a friend of yours, and I was just playing devil's advocate, but this is an Aquarian energy, and there's a film called Gattaca and other films that talk about this sort of thing, is that, you know, will human fetuses be developed in tanks that mimic the amniotic fluids of a female? And you can literally, the idea of designer babies or genetically design humans, because the genome has been mapped, and you can create exactly what it is that you want, and we can play God. That's at the outer limits of the ethics meeting Aquarius. Also meeting the existing control structures of Pisces, which are very much religious overtones. This says, you shall not play God. You shall not do that. But I posed the question the other day when we were juxtaposing the 9th house of higher learning, the 11th house of innovation, and this 12th house of religious overtones. And I said, what happens if you have a couple, 7th house, who cannot conceive, and somebody comes in and says, we can ethically grow a fetus by implanting your seed, your egg in this tank, and you can watch it grow, and we can see the genome developing. We can turn that off because they're going to develop a receding hairline at 24, or they're not going to be, this is it. I'm not saying I'm on one side or the other, but these are the ethical considerations. So when we think about that 11th house, it's not just about the collective and the community. It's about the technologies that are going to disrupt the existing systems. And if we want any idea as to some of the disruption, we just need to go back to the 60s. We just need to look at some of the analogues. We just need to look at the idea of suburbia, living in a white picket fence, mortgage house, with your television on, beaming the 6 o'clock news, started in the 60s. The whole idea of domestication started in the 60s. The first media empires began in the 60s with Walter Cronkite and the black and white television, which was the focal point of how we were learning about the world, started in the 60s. And that 6 o'clock news broadcast became consumed by humanity and shaped our reality. This is what we are talking about. That at the time was a bleeding edge innovation, and it was incredibly disruptive, but ultimately it ended up being a tool that's used against us, where the media is corrupt and unethical. But it started out not that. So there is a lot going on, and of course it's just self-evident that Ophiuchus playing here, part of that energy is the return of the divine feminine into anything and everything. And what does that mean? What that means is balance. If the age of Pisces is the masculine, and we started with the idea of that there is a feminine energy that is required for creation, that if the feminine energy is the womb of creation, we are so focused on the male side and the male impulse, we've forgotten about the feminine. The feminine has an equal and opposite role to anything we do. So all creativity in the 11th house and pushing the boundaries, the classic being genetics and AI right now, and seeds, genetically modified organisms, seeds. You think about the areas, how soulless some of this is. Well, that to me is a sign that we desperately need the feminine intuition. We desperately need the feminine wisdom. And that is the role of Ophiuchus in this incredibly disruptive, messy changing of the ages that we're going through when we move from the 10th house of the Piscean energy into the 11th house of Aquarius.
Yes. The Piscean energy, the 12th house, the 11th house, the guardian, which we haven't yet spoken of, but just to make sure that people can take notes, is Uranus, the explosive energy that it can bring, the quick changes. So perhaps these changes might occur very quickly. The sooner the better. It will be very disruptive, but I think it's fascinating to see all these changes. And we watched this program about the 60s where the feminism came about, and I love discussing how it went from a woman's role as in the house and rearing the children to the woman fighting for her rights, to be able to go to university, to have equal say in all the matters that are part of being part of the collective. Yeah. So going to Pisces now, the 12th house, governed by Neptune. You've often spoken about Neptune being the sacred masculine energy. Piscean energy can be the dreamers. Van Gogh is coming to mind, the dream state of how does that really all come together with that Neptune Piscean? Please give me your thoughts.
Well, it's, this is the last of the houses and the last piece of the interpretation. And I mentioned just before, and I touched on just for clarity about the relationship with the 10th house. Well, these Piscean structures have been inculcated or have been enshrined through the 10th house, right? They are physical structures, be they, as I said, preaching in churches and, the physical structures that represent the power of the Piscean age is the 10th house. So there's a side to Pisces that is manifested in the 10th, right, as institutional power. Political power structures, economic power structures, legal and regulatory power structures, big oil, big pharma, big banking, big whatever, right, big tech. That's those 10th house. That's why often, and I'm touching on the 10th because the 10th and the 12th are quite closely linked. Even though the 10th is Capricorn and the 12th is Pisces, there's a very direct relationship between those two houses. Because to understand the 12th, which I call the house of dissolution and emergence, what is it that's dissolving? Well, it's the 10th house structures. And that's why I said that the 10th house acts as a gateway. And when we think about the gateway of the human experience, and we think about the journey of the soul gets to the 10th house, and often people think I've accomplished everything when I'm the king of the hill, right? I've got my house or the two houses, I've got my cars, or I've got all the certificates on the walls, or whatever it happens to be. However we measure that material success in career and the heights of success, actually that's on an individual level, but on a collective level, the way that the collective, which is we talked about in the 11th house of the collective, the way that the collective celebrates its success is that we've got these great institutions of power like governments, for example, but they've become corrupted, and they've become corrupted because they lack the soul of the mother energy, right? It's not a female per se, it's a feminine energy, and the feminine energy is not the left brain analytical logical energy, it's the creative energy, it's the womb of creation. So when we are talking about the 12th house of dissolution and emergence, we're looking at those two words and we're saying what is dissolving and what is emerging. If the 12th house is the threshold before the first house of Aries, then what emerges starts again in Aries as a spark, as a primordial spark. I like to see the dissolution process as a process of alchemy or fire. That when you take a bunch of wood and offcuts and stuff you've collected and you set it ablaze, what's left is the ashes. But what's in those ashes, even though it may look like there's nothing there, is actually the seed of creation. It is amazing when you see, on television we'll see great wildfires and bush being destroyed and so on and so forth. But if you came back and looked at those same areas years later or even months later, you'll begin to see new life. So what does that say is that what's dissolved is the physical. What's emerging is only existing in the soil, in potential form. We can't see it necessarily with our naked eye, but people, the scientists will know that in that rich layer of the physical dissolving, the phoenix rises from the ashes. So the Pisces energy is that dissolution of the physical. It's also the dissolution of all human experiences. So the dissolution of the physical, the mental, the emotional, the accumulation of resources, everything comes to an end in the Pisces. And what emerges out the other side is something that is ready for rebirth and regeneration and the starting of another cycle. So in practical terms, Pisces is very difficult to understand insofar as when things are dissolving, everything that at that moment, everything that we have known dissolves with it. It is the ultimate cleansing, Pisces. And we sometimes, anybody who has gone through, say, science experiments and that transition, the phase transitions that happen when you move from, I think about what's an easy analogy here. It would be the different states of matter would be water becomes ice, and ice when heated becomes air, and air or steam rises and we can't see it, but it actually coalesces with the air and then forms again, and the cycle begins again. Droplets, water, freezing, fire, dissolution, emergence. There's a cycle there. So Pisces is cyclical. Pisces represents the beginning and the end, the Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail, the endless cycle, the infinity cycle. There's kind of all these expressions for Pisces. The beginning and the end. We can't have something emerge unless something ends. We can't have something ends unless something's emerged. So there's an endless cycle within that Piscean energy. But from a very practical perspective, that's big picture stuff, right? There are lots of people who have a 12th house Ophiuchus. These are people who are intimately connected with the cycles. They are intuitively understand the phase transitions between what the Vedics call creation, maintenance, and destruction. I think it was Vishnu and Brahma, and there's another one in there as well. So the Vedics have dealt with that through a systematic review of Pisces, as saying there are 3 phases of reality. So an Ophiuchus 12th house energy is somebody who intimately understands that. They know and understand that death is but a gateway to life, and that life is but a gateway to death. They understand the metaphysical. They understand the quantum realms in ways that we can only imagine. They can access timelessness. They can access the very heart and soul of the collective unconsciousness, and that is why often Piscean or 12th house Ophiuchian energies, if they're expressing it, may be in profound artists. They may be incredible musicians. They may be people who can use sound and light in ways that just take us to places that we can only imagine. There is a deep, deep connection with the masculine, sacred masculine, but for that, this is the perfect union of the masculine and the feminine as a 12th house Ophiuchus. So this is somebody who understands, if they tune into it, that the basis of creation was never just this primordial spark of the masculine. It was also the womb of creation. And there you have the ingredients for somebody who has such a unique perspective on everything. Everything and anything you can imagine. These are people who probably just know a whole bunch of stuff without really understanding why. They will have a deep sense of the ages shifting. They will be deeply connected into the quantum field, because dissolution and emergence is something that they are familiar with. They are familiar with the idea that the temporary physical world passes away. And the last thing I would say about that Piscean energy is that if somebody in their 12 sign system, they're a Pisces, but they don't understand, they don't get that under the 13 sign system, they've actually got a 12th house in Ophiuchus. That's an Ophiuchus house for them. That's where Ophiuchus expresses. They may be prone to being swept away by this profound wisdom that they have. They may feel like they are so unrelatable to the world because people are like, we just can't relate to that very floaty, ephemeral, high frequency energy. So somebody who is expressing Ophiuchus in the 12th house, that will help them to be relatable in a way that perhaps they haven't ever known before. Because what they're actually showing in and of them, of their being, is that they are the perfect integration of the masculine and the feminine polarities. That is what an Ophiuchus 12th house energy is the perfect union of the masculine and the feminine. And where that can go in terms of knowledge, understanding, communication, art, music, sound, light, insight is absolutely unknowable. So for those out there who think they may have an Ophiuchus 12th house, this is a call out to you. Find out, because if you are, we need you. The world needs you to be living that Ophiuchus 12th house energy.
Yes, and that's very much one of our missions, is to get people in touch with their Ophiuchian energy. And so whether it is not just if your sun is an Ophiuchus, your moon or your rising sign, it is this conversation that you've listened to is very much getting you in touch with where is Ophiuchian expressing in your chart. And you find that out by getting a 13 sign chart drawn and then really understand it. What does it mean? How can I flourish in my life in that sense? And we need you. We want to change the world to make this beautiful planet such an amazing place to live, to restore Mother Gaia to her glory, and for humanity to excel. Really. Yeah. So thank you, David, for sharing your knowledge, your understanding of these 12 houses and how each house can bring beautiful energies to each and every one of us. You'll find all our videos on YouTube. If you like listening on the go, it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible Podcasts, Podbeam, and anywhere else. I'm working on getting a website up and running so you can find all our information there. But hit us up for a chat, a natal reading. Anything else you want to share, David?
That's it for me.
Thank you. Ngā mihi. Until next time.
Namaste.